The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, crystal exploding against the marble floor of our penthouse living room. Marcus didn't even flinch at the sound, too busy scrolling through his phone while delivering what he clearly thought was devastating news. "You have 1 day to get out," he repeated, not bothering to look up from his screen. "My lawyer says that's generous considering the prenup. Most cheating wives get nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I stared at the champagne pooling between the shards, watching. The bubbles disappear one by one. 24 hours. He thought he was being merciful. "Actually," I said quietly, reaching for my own phone, "you have 1 hour." That got his attention. Marcus finally looked up, his perfectly styled hair catching, the afternoon light streaming through our floor-to-ceiling windows. The windows of the apartment he thought he owned. "Excuse me?" His laugh was sharp, condescending. "Sweetheart, I think the shock is getting to you. You're the one who got caught. You're the one who has to leave." I opened my phone's calculator, app, making a show of it. "Let's see. It's 3:17 p.m. now. That gives you until 4:17 to pack whatever you can carry and get out of my building." "Your building?" Marcus stood up from the Italian leather sofa, his 6-foot frame imposing in the way he'd perfected during his years as a corporate lawyer. "Have you lost your mind, Elena? This is my penthouse. These are my cars. This is my life you've been living for 3 years. I walked to the kitchen island, careful to step around the broken glass, and pulled out a manila folder I'd hidden behind the coffee maker that morning. 3 years of marriage, and Marcus had never once made coffee. He wouldn't know it was there if I'd wrapped it in neon lights. "Your penthouse," I mused, opening the folder. "Tell me, Marcus, what's the address of this building? What kind of game—" "The address, Marcus." His jaw tightened. 1247 Meridian Heights, Penthouse A. I nodded, pulling out the first document. "And who owns 1247 Meridian Heights?" "Harrison Property Group, obviously. Everyone knows they own half the luxury buildings in the city." I traced my finger along the letterhead. "And who owns Harrison Property Group?" The color was starting to drain from his face. I'd seen that look before, in courtrooms when he realized his case was falling apart, but he'd never worn it at home. "Elena, what the hell are you doing?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I held up the document so he could see the signature at the bottom. "Celestial Holdings owns Harrison Property Group. Has for about, 7 years now. Right around the time I graduated from business school." Marcus grabbed the paper from my hands, his eyes scanning frantically. "This is fake. You're trying to—" Page 2 shows the chain of ownership. Celestial Holdings is owned by Meridian Enterprises. Meridian Enterprises is owned by— I paused for a dramatic effect. "E.L. Chen Consulting." The paper was trembling in his hands now. "Elena Louise Chen, your initials. Got it in one." I pulled out another document. "This is the deed to this penthouse. Purchased by E.L. Chen Consulting in 2019, 2 full years before we met." Funny how that works. Marcus sank back onto the sofa, the papers scattered around him like fallen leaves. But the mortgage documents I signed were for the car loans. Both cars, actually. The Porsche and the Tesla. Congratulations. You own 2 very expensive vehicles that are about to be repossessed since you'll no longer have income to make the payments. I could see his mind racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. 3. Years of marriage to a woman he thought was a struggling freelance graphic designer. 3 years of him paying for dinners with what he thought was his money, buying me jewelry with what he thought were his bonuses, taking me on vacations to properties he didn't know I owned. "The restaurant," he whispered. "The one where we had our anniversary dinner last month. You said you'd never been there before." I smiled, remembering how he'd made a show of ordering the most expensive wine, How he'd told the sommelier about his little wife, who didn't understand fine dining. Lumiere has been in my portfolio for 3 years. I hired the chef personally. He makes excellent champagne risotto, by the way. You should try it sometime if you can afford it. Elena, I don't understand. If you own all this, why the charade? Why pretend to be broke, struggling, dependent on you? I perched on the arm of the chair across from him, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. Because, Marcus, I wanted to see who you really were when you thought you held all the power. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Outside, the city hummed with its usual afternoon energy, completely unaware that inside this penthouse, a man's world was crumbling. 3 years, I continued, my voice steady and calm. 3 years of watching you talk down to servers because you thought they needed your tips to survive. 3 years of listening to you mock your unsuccessful friends while you bought rounds. With my money. 3 years of you explaining my own business concepts back to me like I was a child. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. 3 years of you flirting with other women at my own events, thinking I was too naive to notice. 3 years of you scheduling meetings with divorce lawyers, thinking I'd never find out. 3 years of you moving money into offshore accounts, believing you were protecting assets that were never yours to begin with. The papers in his lap were forgotten now. His face had gone from pale to gray, and I could see the exact moment he realized just how thoroughly he'd been played. The private. Investigator's report was quite thorough, I said, pulling out a thick folder. Cassandra Williams, 28, works at Morrison & Associates. You've been seeing her for 8 months. Sweet girl, really. I had lunch with her yesterday. You. What? Oh, yes, we had a lovely chat. She had no idea you were married, of course. Thought, you were this successful bachelor lawyer who owned half the city. She was quite shocked to learn that you live off your wife's money and haven't won a case in 2 years. Marcus shot to his feet, pacing toward the windows. You can't destroy my life because you're jealous. Jealous? I laughed, the sound echoing in the vast space. Marcus, I'm not destroying your life. I'm simply removing myself from it. There's a difference. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. The same simple black dress he'd criticized that morning for being too plain for a lawyer's wife. If only he'd known it cost more than his monthly salary. Your personal items are already packed, I said, nodding toward 3 suitcases by the door. I had my assistant handle it this morning while you were at the office. Don't worry, everything's there. Your clothes, your law books, your collection of watches I bought you for various anniversaries. Elena, please. We can work this. Out. The affair. It didn't mean anything. Cassandra doesn't mean anything. I walked to my purse and pulled out a thick envelope. These are the divorce papers, already filed, as of this morning. No-fault divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Very clean, very quiet. Your reputation will remain intact. His hands shook as he took the envelope. The prenup protects my assets from you, not the other way around. You'll keep your car loans and your student debt. Everything else stays with its rightful owner. I checked my phone. 3:47. You have 30 minutes. I need more time. I need to call my lawyer, figure out where I'm going to live. Cassandra has a lovely 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. I'm sure she'd be happy to help you get back on your feet. That is, once you explain why you never mentioned being married. Marcus stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. In a way, he was. For 3 years, I'd been Elena, the struggling designer. Elena, the grateful wife. Elena who needed his protection and guidance. Now I was someone else entirely. How? He whispered. How did you hide all this? I tilted my head, considering the question. You never asked the right questions, Marcus. You saw what you wanted to see, a young woman impressed by your success, grateful for your attention. You never wondered why I never seemed stressed about money, or how I always knew exactly which wine to order, or why every maitre d' in the city seemed to recognize me. It was true. Marcus had been so blinded by his own ego that he'd missed every clue. The way restaurant managers personally greeted me, the fact that I never carried cash but always had access to money, the expensive skincare products I claimed were samples from friends, the way I could navigate any social situation with ease, speaking fluent French with the art dealers and perfect Italian with the sommeliers. "You made me feel like a king," he said softly, and for the first time since this conversation started, he sounded genuinely hurt rather than angry. "No, Marcus, you made yourself feel like a king. I just didn't contradict you." I walked to the window, looking down at the street where his Porsche was parked. My Porsche, technically, though he'd never know that. 52, I announced. "You're cutting it close." He grabbed the suitcases, his movements jerky and desperate. At the door, he turned back one last time. "What about us? What about the 3 years we had together?" I considered the question seriously. There had been good moments. Quiet Sunday mornings, shared laughter over inside jokes, the way he held me during thunderstorms. But they'd all been built on a foundation of lies. His lies about who he thought I was, and my lies about who I actually was. "I think," I said finally, "we both got exactly what we deserved." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I was alone in the silence of the penthouse. For the first time in 3 years, I could breathe freely in my own home. I poured myself a glass of wine, a bottle from my private collection that Marcus had never even known existed, and settled onto the sofa. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Elena, it's Cassandra. I know this is awkward, but we should talk. There are some things about Marcus you should know." I smiled, typing back. "I think I know everything I need to, but thank you for the offer." Another message came through, this one from my assistant. "Building security confirms Marcus Chen has left the premises. Shall I change the locks?" "Yes," I replied, "and cancel his parking pass." The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Tomorrow I would emerge from the shadows I'd been hiding in for 3 years. I would reclaim my name, my business, my life. But tonight, I would simply sit in my penthouse, surrounded by my things, and enjoy the profound quiet of a storm finally past. After all, some victories are best savored alone. The morning light filtered through my penthouse windows as I stood in front of my walk-in closet, selecting my armor for the day ahead. For 3 years, I'd hidden behind modest department store dresses and drugstore makeup. Today, I would wear my real skin. The Hermes blazer fit like it was made for me. Because it was. The Christian Louboutin heels clicked against the marble floor with authority I'd forgotten I possessed. In the mirror, Elena the struggling designer was gone, replaced by E.L. Chen, the woman who owned half the commercial real estate in the city. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. Word travels fast in certain circles, especially when someone like Marcus suddenly finds himself homeless and carless in the span of an evening. "Elena, darling, is it true about Marcus?" Victoria Blackwell, old money socialite and chronic gossip. Her husband sat on 3 boards of companies I owned through shell corporations. She had no idea we'd met at charity galas where I'd been introduced as Marcus's sweet little wife. It's true. Emmy God, the drama. Lunch today? The usual place? Victoria, the usual place. Le Bernardin, where I held a permanent reservation under my real name, where Marcus had never been able to get a table, no matter how many times. He'd tried to impress clients, PM, but first I had other business to attend to. Morrison & Associates occupied 3 floors of a building I'd purchased through Celestial Holdings 2 years ago. It was time to meet my tenants. The lobby of 425 Park Avenue buzzed with the usual morning energy. I'd watched this building from security feeds, monitored its operations through quarterly reports, but never set foot inside as myself. Today, the doorman's eyes widened as I approached. "Ms. Chen, we weren't expecting you." Of course they weren't. The mysterious owner who communicated, only through lawyers and property managers, was making her first public appearance. "Good morning, David." I'd memorized the names of every employee in my buildings. "I'll be visiting Morrison and Associates this morning. No need to announce me." The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me time to review the intelligence I gathered. Marcus worked for Thomas Morrison, a man who'd built his reputation defending corporate executives in high-profile cases. Morrison had no idea his biggest case had just walked into his office building. The law firm's reception area was all polished wood and intimidating leather, designed to make clients feel both impressed and slightly off balance. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, looked up as I entered. "I'm here to see Thomas Morrison," I announced. "Do you have an appointment?" "Mr. Morrison's schedule is completely booked for the next 3 months." I smiled, placing a business card on her desk. "I think he'll make time." She glanced at the card, simple, elegant, with just my name and the Celestial Holdings logo. Her expression shifted from polite dismissal to barely concealed panic as she recognized the company name. I'll check with Mr. Morrison immediately." Within 2 minutes, Thomas Morrison himself appeared in the reception area, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded courtrooms. I'd seen his picture in legal journals, but meeting him in person revealed something more interesting. Intelligence sharp enough to recognize when the game had changed. "Ms. Chen." He extended his hand, his grip firm and calculating. "This is an unexpected pleasure. Please, come to my office." Morrison's office occupied a corner of the building with floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of Central Park. Views I owned, in a building I'd purchased, overlooking land that belonged to the city but was managed by companies in my portfolio. "I assume this visit concerns your husband," Morrison said, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk. "Former husband, as of yesterday afternoon." "And yes, it does." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying me with the intensity of a man who'd made his career reading people. "Marcus mentioned you were struggling financially. A graphic designer, I believe he said? Among other things." I crossed my legs, noting how his eyes flicked to my shoes, my bag, my jewelry, all pieces that cost more than most people made in a year. "I'm curious, Mr. Morrison. In your professional opinion, how would you advise a client who discovered his spouse had been systematically moving assets offshore in preparation for divorce?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Morrison's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Hypothetically?" he asked carefully. "Of course. Hypothetically, such behavior could constitute fraud, depending on the circumstances. If the assets in question belonged to both parties, or if there was an attempt to hide marital property from division," I nodded thoughtfully. "And if the spouse attempting this fraud had also been engaged in adultery? That would certainly impact any settlement negotiations." I opened my purse and withdrew a thick folder, placing it on his desk. "These are copies of documentation regarding various offshore accounts opened in the past 18 months. All transactions were made with funds that Marcus believed belonged to him, but which were actually drawn from accounts he had access to as my authorized user." Morrison's poker face slipped slightly as he opened the folder. Page after page of bank statements, transaction records, and account openings, all bearing Marcus's signature. "There's also documentation of his affair with Ms. Williams," I continued. "Phone records, hotel receipts, photographs. Quite thorough, really." "Ms. Chen, why are you showing me this?" "Because Marcus hired you to handle our divorce. He's probably sitting in your waiting room right now, hoping you can help him claim half of what he thinks are our joint assets." I leaned forward. "I wanted you to understand the full scope of the situation before that meeting." Morrison closed the folder, his expression unreadable. Are you asking me to drop him as a client? I'm asking you to provide him with competent legal counsel, which, given these circumstances, would involve advising him that his best option is to accept the settlement my attorneys will offer, quietly and quickly. And if he doesn't, then he'll discover that attempting to defraud someone who owns the building where your firm operates tends to have consequences. The threat was delivered with the same tone I might use to comment on the weather, but Morrison heard it clearly. His eyes flicked to the windows, then back to me. Understanding. Dawning. You own this building. I own many buildings, Mr. Morrison. This one happens to house several law firms, a medical practice, and a very nice restaurant on the ground floor, all paying rent to Celestial Holdings, which pays management fees to Harrison Property Group, which is owned by Meridian Enterprises, which is owned by E.L. Chen Consulting. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, he spoke. Marcus should be here any minute. Would you prefer to leave before he arrives? Actually, I think I'll stay. It's been a while since I've seen him in his professional element. 20 minutes later, Marcus entered Morrison's office looking like he'd slept in his car, which it turned out he had. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair unwashed, and there was a desperate edge to his movements that made me almost feel sorry for him, almost. Tom, thank God you could see me on short notice. Elena's lost her mind. She's claiming she owns our apartment, our cars, everything. She's got fake documents, forged signatures, the whole thing. I need you to... He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me sitting calmly in the chair beside his. Hello, Marcus. What the hell is she doing here? Morrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps you should sit down, Marcus. No, I want to know why my wife is in my lawyer's office. Former wife, I corrected gently. And I'm here because Mr. Morrison and I were discussing the various legal implications of your recent financial activities. The color drained from Marcus's face as Morrison slid the folder across the desk. These are copies of documentation Ms. Chen provided regarding offshore accounts opened in your name. Marcus grabbed the folder, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. I can explain this. Can you explain why you transferred $200,000 from accounts belonging to E.L. Chen Consulting without authorization? Morrison asked. E.L. Chen. Elena, those are your initials, but that doesn't mean you own a consulting company. This is ridiculous. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Sarah? Yes, it's Elena. Could you please send over the incorporation? Documents for E.L. Chen Consulting? The ones from 2015? I paused. Yes, the building on Park Avenue, Mr. Morrison's office. Thank you. Within minutes, Morrison's assistant knocked on the door, carrying a manila envelope. I handed it to Marcus, who opened it with trembling fingers. Incorporated 2015, I said as he read. 7 years before we met. Current valuation approximately $200 million in real estate assets alone, not counting the various subsidiary companies. Marcus looked up from the papers, his eyes wild. This is impossible. You were broke when I met you. You lived in that tiny studio apartment. You drove that old Honda. I still own that studio apartment. It's in a building I bought when I was 25. Very good investment property, actually. The Honda was useful for maintaining my cover. Your cover? I stood up, smoothing my skirt. The cover I've been maintaining for 3 years while I watched you reveal exactly who you are when you think you have power over someone. Marcus turned to Morrison desperately. Tom, you have to help me. This woman has been living a lie, manipulating me. Marcus, Morrison interrupted quietly. I think you need to understand something. Ms. Chen owns this building. She could terminate our lease at any time. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He sank into the chair, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. 3 years, he whispered. 3 years of marriage, and you've been playing some kind of game? Not a game, Marcus. An evaluation. I wanted to see what kind of man you were when you thought you held all the cards. I walked to the window, looking down at the street where people hurried to their jobs, their lives, their real relationships built on honesty rather than deception. For 3 years, I watched you dismiss waitresses, belittle service workers, and mock anyone you perceived as beneath you. I listened to you explain basic business concepts to me as if I were a child while you were spending money I made. I sat quietly while you flirted with other women, all the while planning to leave me and take half of what you thought were our assets. Marcus was crying now, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. Elena, please, I love you. The affair, it didn't mean anything. I was confused, scared about our future. Our future? I turned back to face him. Marcus, there never was an our future. There was your future, which you planned very carefully, and there was my future, which I've been protecting all along. Collected my purse and walked toward the door. Mr. Morrison will explain the settlement terms. They're quite generous, considering the circumstances. I suggest you accept them. Elena, wait. Marcus scrambled to his feet. What about the man I was before all this? What about the good times we had? I paused at the door, considering his question. There had been good times, quiet mornings, shared laughter, moments when I'd almost convinced myself that the love might be real on both sides. The man you were before this is the same man who opened secret bank accounts, planned a secret divorce, and carried on a secret affair. The only difference is that now you know I was keeping secrets too. I left them there. Marcus broken and desperate, Morrison calculating the damage to his own reputation. In the elevator, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Cassandra Williams. The lobby was busy with the lunch crowd, professionals, and tourists mixing in the kind of urban symphony I'd been watching from above for years. As I walked toward the street, my phone rang. Elena? It's Cassandra. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but there's something you need to know about Marcus. I stepped into the back of my waiting car, a discreet black sedan driven by David, who'd been on my payroll for 5 years and had never once seen me get into a car with Marcus. I'm listening, I said. He's not who you think he is. The law firm, his success rate, even his law degree, I think it's all fake. I started looking into it after our conversation yesterday, and nothing adds up. The car pulled into traffic as I processed this new information. 3 years of marriage to a man whose entire identity was apparently as fabricated as my own. Cassandra, I think you and I should meet. After all, the unraveling was just beginning. The wine bar where I'd agreed to meet Cassandra was tucked away in Soho, the kind of place that catered to people who valued discretion over spectacle. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table with clear sightlines to both entrances. A habit from my business dealings that had served me well over the years. Cassandra Williams was exactly as I'd expected from the surveillance. Photos, petite, blonde, with the kind of nervous energy that came from discovering your entire reality had been built on lies. She spotted me immediately, her eyes widening as she took in my transformation from the meek wife she'd heard about to the composed woman sitting before her. You look different than I expected, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I imagine Marcus described me quite differently. She nodded, fidgeting with her purse strap. He said you were fragile, dependent, that you'd fallen apart without his support. I signaled the waitress for 2 glasses of the house red. What made you start investigating him? Honestly, you. Cassandra looked surprised by her own answer. When you told me about the penthouse, the cars, all of it, I realized I didn't actually know anything concrete about Marcus's life. I'd been dating him for 8 months, and I'd never seen where he lived, never met his friends, never been to his office. The wine arrived, and I watched Cassandra take a large gulp before continuing. So I started digging, first into Morrison and Associates. Did you know there's no record of Marcus ever working there as anything more than a contract paralegal? I kept my expression neutral, though internally I was recalibrating everything I thought I knew about my former husband. "He's not a lawyer," Cassandra continued. "I checked with the State Bar Association. Marcus Chen has never been licensed to practice law in New York, or anywhere else for that matter." The pieces were starting to form a picture I hadn't anticipated. What about law school? No record of graduation from any accredited program. I found some continuing education courses he took online, but nothing that would qualify him for the bar exam. Cassandra pulled out her phone, scrolling through screenshots. There's more. The cases he claimed to have won? Either they don't exist, or they were handled by other attorneys at the firm. I thought back to the dinner parties where Marcus had regaled guests with stories of his courtroom victories, the way he dismissed my suggestions about legal strategies, with the authority of professional experience. How did he maintain the charade at Morrison & Associates? Document review, filing, basic paralegal work. But he convinced Morrison that he was working toward partnership, that he just needed time to build his client base. Cassandra's laugh was bitter. Apparently, he's very convincing when he wants to be. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been pretending to be powerless, Marcus had been pretending to be powerful. Two frauds, living a lie within a lie. "There's something else," Cassandra said, her voice dropping. "I think he might be wanted by the police." She slid her phone across the table. On the screen was a news article from Chicago dated 3 years ago. "Investment advisor disappears after client funds go missing." The photo was unmistakably Marcus, though he was using a different name, Michael Carson. The article described how he'd vanished after defrauding elderly clients out of their retirement savings, leaving behind a trail of forged documents and empty accounts. "Marcus Chen might not even be his real name," Cassandra whispered. "I found 3 other identities he's used in the past 5 years. Each time he targets wealthy women, gains their trust, then disappears with whatever he can steal." The restaurant suddenly felt too warm. I pulled out my own phone, scrolling through my security footage from the past 3 years, looking for patterns I'd missed. The times Marcus had insisted on handling our banking, his interest in my daily routines, the way he'd pushed for joint access to accounts I'd refused to share. "Elena, I think you were his biggest target ever. If he'd succeeded in divorcing you and claiming half your assets, he would have disappeared with millions." I finished the thought, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. My phone buzzed with an urgent message from my head of security. Facial recognition. Alert. Marcus Chen flagged at JFK Airport. TSA hold requested. I showed the message to Cassandra, whose face went pale. "He's trying to leave the country." "Not anymore." I was already dialing my attorney. "Rebecca, it's Elena. I need an emergency court order." "Yes, I'll hold." While my lawyer worked on freezing Marcus's ability to travel, I called my security team. Within minutes, they'd traced his location to Terminal 4, where he was apparently trying to book a last-minute flight to Zurich using yet another identity. "Elena," Cassandra said quietly, "what happens now?" I considered the question as my phone continued buzzing with updates. The FBI was interested in the Chicago case. The NYPD wanted to discuss the identity fraud. Immigration Services were reviewing his citizenship status, which was apparently as fabricated as everything else about him. Now he faces the consequences of his choices. But even as I said it, I felt a strange hollowness. 3 years of my life wasted on a man who'd never existed. Not just Marcus the fake lawyer, but Marcus the loving husband. Marcus the man who'd held me during storms and laughed at my jokes and made me believe sometimes that what we had was real. "I have to ask," Cassandra said, breaking into my thoughts. "If you're this wealthy, this powerful, why did you stay with him for 3 years? Why not just leave?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since yesterday. The truth was complicated, layered with motivations I wasn't entirely proud of. At first, it was curiosity. I wanted to see how he'd behave if he thought he had power over me. But then, I paused, searching for the right words. I think part of me wanted to believe the fantasy too. That maybe he could love me for who he thought I was, without the complications of money and power. And now? Now I know that neither of us was ever real with the other. He was pretending to be successful. I was pretending to be helpless. We were both lying from the beginning. My phone rang, Rebecca with an update. The court order is approved, she reported. Marcus is in federal custody. They're holding him on identity fraud charges while they sort out the various cases against him. Elena, there's something else. They found evidence that he's been planning this for months. Detailed financial records, copies of documents he believed proved your assets, even surveillance photos of your daily routines. The violation felt deeper than adultery, more personal than theft. He'd been studying me, cataloging my weaknesses, preparing to destroy me systematically. There's a storage unit in Queens, Rebecca continued, full of documents from previous victims. The FBI estimates he's defrauded at least 12 women over the past decade, maybe more. I looked across the table at Cassandra, who was staring into her wine glass. How many of us do you think knew deep down that something wasn't right? All of us, she said without hesitation. But we wanted to believe the lie more than we wanted to face the truth. The afternoon dissolved into a blur of phone calls and legal proceedings. By evening, the story was breaking on local news. Prominent businessman revealed as serial con artist, wealthy wife's dramatic reversal of fortune, the tangled web of deception that had fooled an entire social circle. I watched the coverage. From my penthouse, noting how the reporters focused on the dramatic elements while missing the deeper story. This wasn't just about money or fraud. It was about the lies we tell ourselves, the fantasies we're willing to live, the price of refusing to see what's right in front of us. My phone rang. Victoria Blackwell, breathless with excitement. Elena, darling, I'm watching the news. Is it true? About Marcus being this criminal mastermind? And you've been secretly wealthy this whole time? It's true. But why didn't you tell us? All those dinner parties where we treated you like the nobody my husband told you I was? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Victoria and her friends had been complicit in the charade, dismissing me at social events, excluding me from conversations about business or politics, treating me like an accessory rather than a person. Elena, we had no idea. You had no curiosity, I corrected. There's a difference. After I hung up, I stood at my window watching the city lights flicker to life. Somewhere in a federal holding facility, the man I'd known as Marcus Chen was probably realizing that his greatest con had also been his greatest mistake. He'd targeted a woman he thought was vulnerable and discovered instead that she was the one person who could destroy him completely. The intercom buzzed. David from the front desk. Ms. Chen? There's a woman here to see you. Says her name is Patricia Morrison and that her husband worked with Marcus. I closed my eyes, understanding immediately. Thomas Morrison's wife, probably desperate for answers about how her husband's law firm had been harboring a fraud. Send her up. The woman who emerged from the elevator was elegant in the way that came from old money and careful breeding. Her composure was perfect, but I could see the cracks around the edges. Mrs. Morrison, please call me Patricia. I think we have quite a lot to discuss. I poured 2 glasses of wine while she settled on the sofa, her movements precise and controlled. My husband came home today looking like he'd aged 10 years, she began. He's been practicing law for 30 years, and he said he's never felt as outmaneuvered as he did in that meeting with you. I wasn't trying to outmaneuver anyone. I was trying to protect myself. From Marcus, yes, but also from Tom. She met. My eyes directly. You own our building. You could destroy his practice with a phone call. That's quite a lot of power to wield. I considered her words carefully. Patricia Morrison wasn't here to beg or negotiate. She was here to understand the rules of a game she'd just discovered she was playing. Your husband is good at what he does. I said finally. He'll survive this. Will he? The news is already speculating about how a respected law firm could be fooled by a con artist. Tom's reputation is built on being able to read people, spot deception. How does he recover from this? It was a fair question. Morrison and Associates would weather the scandal, but Thomas Morrison's credibility had taken a serious hit. Perhaps, I said slowly, your husband might benefit from having a client who appreciates discretion and competent legal counsel. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. Are you offering him your business? I'm offering him an opportunity to demonstrate that yesterday's mistake doesn't define his professional judgment. She smiled for the first time since entering my apartment. You're quite ruthless, aren't you? I prefer to think of it as thorough. After Patricia left, I found myself alone again with the weight of the day's revelations. Marcus, or whatever. His real name had been a stranger from the beginning. Our entire relationship had been built on mutual deception, each of us playing a role we thought the other needed to see. But as I prepared for bed in my real home, wearing my real clothes, being my real self for the first time in 3 years, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't devastated by the loss of our marriage. I was relieved by the return of my truth. Tomorrow would bring more complications, legal proceedings, media attention, the complex work of rebuilding relationships with people who'd only known my facade. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully, in my own bed, surrounded by my own things, finally free from the exhausting work of pretending to be someone else. After all, the most dangerous lies aren't the ones other people tell us. They're the ones we tell ourselves about who we're willing to become for love. 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest, I stood in the marble lobby of the federal courthouse, watching a parade of women file past me toward the elevator. 12 confirmed. Victims ranging in age from 28 to 67, each carrying a manila folder containing the remnants of their shattered trust. Sarah, my assistant, appeared at my elbow with a tablet full of media requests. Channel 7 wants an exclusive interview. The Times is running a feature on romance fraud, and there's a documentary crew that's been calling every day. Decline them all, I said, watching the elevator doors close on the last group of women. This isn't about me. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. The media had latched onto the dramatic reversal, the wealthy wife who'd fooled everyone, including the con man who'd tried to con her. It made for compelling television, even if it missed the deeper story. The courtroom was packed when we finally made our way upstairs. I'd chosen a seat in the back, hoping to observe without becoming part of the spectacle. But the moment I entered, every head turned. Whispers rippled through the gallery as people pointed and stared at the woman who'd become the face of Marcus's downfall. At the prosecutor's table sat Jennifer Walsh, the federal attorney who'd taken over the case once they'd discovered the scope of Marcus's crimes. She was younger than I'd expected, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she took these cases personally. The defense table was notably sparse. Just a court-appointed attorney who'd drawn the short straw and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus's high-powered legal team had abandoned him once they'd realized he couldn't pay their fees with stolen money. Then the bailiff called for all to rise, and Marcus was led into the courtroom. I barely recognized him. The confident, well-groomed man who'd mocked my supposed unemployment had been replaced by someone hollow-eyed and diminished. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. His hair, which he'd always kept perfectly styled, hung limp and unwashed. Our eyes met across the courtroom for just a moment. In his gaze, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine fear. Not the manipulative panic he'd shown when his schemes were exposed, but the deep terror of someone who'd finally run out of lies to tell. Judge Harrison, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and no patience for nonsense, took her seat and immediately called for order. The proceedings began with a reading of the charges: identity fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, violation of federal banking regulations. The list went on for nearly 10 minutes. Mr. Carson, Judge Harrison said, using what the FBI had determined was Marcus's real name. How do you plead? His attorney stood slowly. Your Honor, my client wishes to enter a plea of guilty to all charges. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. After weeks of building toward this moment, the resolution felt almost anticlimactic. But then, Jennifer Walsh stood to present the prosecution's evidence, and I realized the real reckoning was just beginning. Your Honor, she began, the defendants' crimes span over a decade and have devastated the lives of at least 15 women across 6 states. The total amount stolen exceeds $3.2 million, representing the life savings, retirement funds, and investment capital of his victims. She gestured toward the gallery where the other women sat. These victims trusted the defendant with their hearts and their financial futures. He systematically exploited their emotions, their vulnerabilities, and their capacity for love, one by one. Walsh called the victims to the stand to give impact statements. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. Charming man, whirlwind romance, gradual financial manipulation, devastating betrayal. Margaret Hoffman, 72, had lost her entire retirement fund to a man she'd known as David Mitchell. I trusted him with everything, she said, her voice shaking. My late husband's life insurance, my savings, the money I'd planned to leave my grandchildren. He took it all. Jennifer Rodriguez, 34, described how Marcus had convinced her to refinance her house and invest in his fake business venture. I lost my home, my credit, my ability to provide for my daughter. We lived in my car for 3 months. The testimony continued for hours. Each story was a variation on the same theme: trust exploited, love weaponized, lives destroyed by carefully calculated cruelty. Finally, Walsh called my name. I made my way to the witness stand, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom following my movement. As I was sworn in, I caught sight of Marcus watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Ms. Chen, Walsh began, you were married to the defendant for 3 years under the name Marcus Chen. During that time, did he make any attempts to defraud you? Yes, I replied, my voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. He opened multiple offshore accounts using funds from my business accounts, which he had access to as my authorized user. He also began divorce proceedings while hiding assets, intending to claim half of what he believed were our joint properties. How much money? Did he attempt to steal? The offshore transfers totaled approximately $400,000. However, the assets he intended to claim in the divorce were valued at over $100 million. The courtroom gasped. Even though the numbers had been reported in the media, hearing them spoken, allowed in federal court seemed to drive home the scope of Marcus's ambition. Ms. Chen, what made you suspicious of the defendant's activities? I paused, considering how to answer truthfully without revealing the full extent of my own deception. I had been monitoring certain financial accounts. When I noticed unauthorized transfers, I began investigating further. And what did you discover? That everything about my husband was a lie. His name, his profession, his background, his education. The man I married didn't exist. Walsh nodded. During your marriage, did the defendant ever express remorse for his treatment of previous victims? He was unaware that I knew about previous victims. However, he frequently made disparaging comments about people he considered financially unsuccessful, including several of the women he'd previously defrauded. I saw Marcus flinch at that. Even now, he seemed surprised that his casual cruelty had been noted and remembered. One final question, Ms. Chen. What impact has the defendant's deception had on your life? The question hung in the air as I considered my answer. The easy response would be to claim devastation, betrayal, emotional trauma. And all of that would be true. But the complete truth was more complicated. The defendant's deception forced me to confront my own capacity for self-deception. I said finally, I spent 3 years pretending to be someone I wasn't, partly to protect myself, but also because I wanted to believe that love could exist without the complications of power and money. His betrayal taught me that authentic relationships require authentic people. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt truly free. Not just from Marcus's manipulation, but from my own complicity in the lie we'd built together. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week, but Judge Harrison had heard enough to make her feelings clear. Mr. Carson, she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom's silence, you have demonstrated a callous disregard for the well-being of others that goes far beyond mere criminal intent. You have weaponized love itself, turning what should be humanity's greatest strength into a tool for exploitation. Marcus's attorney attempted to present mitigating factors: difficult childhood, financial desperation, psychological issues. But Judge Harrison wasn't interested in excuses. The court will consider all relevant factors at sentencing, she said curtly. Until then, the defendant will remain in federal custody. As Marcus was led away, he turned one last time to look at me. This time I didn't look away. I held his gaze steadily, letting him see exactly who I really was. Not the fragile wife he'd tried to manipulate, not the vulnerable target he'd thought he'd found, but the woman who'd systematically documented his destruction of others and ensured he'd face consequences for his choices. Outside the courthouse, I was immediately surrounded by reporters and cameras. Questions were shouted from every direction. Ms. Chen, how does it feel to see justice served? Do you plan to help other victims? Will you be writing a book about your experience? I held up my hand for silence. When the crowd quieted, I spoke clearly and deliberately. Today's proceedings weren't about revenge or vindication. They were about accountability. Marcus Carson chose to build his life by destroying others. The women who testified today showed tremendous courage in confronting that destruction and demanding justice. What about your own deception during the marriage? Called out a reporter from the back. Don't you bear some responsibility for enabling his crimes? It was the question I'd been dreading, but also the one I'd been preparing for. I made the choice to hide my identity and financial status from my husband. That was wrong, and it complicated an already toxic situation. But my deception was about protecting my assets. His deception was about stealing other people's assets. Intent matters. As I walked away from the courthouse, Sarah fell into step beside me. That was well handled, she said quietly. Was it? I'm not sure there's a well-handled way to discuss 3 years of mutual dishonesty. My phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer Walsh. Sentencing next Friday. Carson's attorney is pushing for minimum security, but given the testimony today, I expect Judge Harrison will be less lenient. Thank you for your courage in testifying. Courage. The word felt strange applied to me. I'd spent 3 years hiding from my own identity, then revealed the truth only when it served my purposes. That wasn't courage. It was calculation. But as I climbed into my car and David pulled into traffic, I realized something important. The calculation was over. For the first time in years, I had no agenda to pursue, no role to maintain, no lies to protect. I was simply Elena Chen. No masks, no pretense, no protection beyond the truth of who I actually was. And terrifying as that felt, it was also liberating. The reckoning wasn't just about Marcus facing justice for his crimes. It was about all of us, his victims, his enablers, even his wife, finally confronting the full cost of our various deceptions. Some reckonings destroy everything they touch, but others, if we're fortunate, clear the ground for something genuine to grow. 6 months after Marcus Carson received his 15-year federal sentence, I found myself in an unexpected place. A therapist's office in Brooklyn, sitting across from Dr. Amanda Rivers, a woman whose no-nonsense approach had been recommended by 3 separate colleagues. "You've built an empire while pretending to be powerless," Dr. Rivers observed, reviewing the notes from our previous sessions. "You've exposed a serial con artist while maintaining your own elaborate deception. You've emerged victorious from what could have been financial ruin. So, why are you here?" I considered her question, staring out the window at the tree-lined street below. 6 months ago, I would have had a calculated answer ready, designed to reveal just enough truth to be believable while protecting the rest. "Because I don't know who I am when I'm not playing a role," I said finally. It was the first completely honest thing I'd said to anyone in years. The process of rebuilding my identity had been more complex than I'd anticipated. At work, my employees struggled to reconcile the mysterious CEO they'd never met with the woman who now walked through their offices daily. Some adapted quickly, grateful to finally have direct access to decision-making. Others seemed almost resentful that the mystique was gone. Jennifer Walsh had called the week before with an update on the Victim Restitution Fund. "We've recovered about 60% of the stolen money," she'd reported. "The offshore accounts, the liquidated assets, even the cars you technically owned. It's going back to the people who lost everything." I'd contributed an additional $2 million to the fund, anonymously. It seemed like the least I could do for the women whose testimonies had haunted my dreams for months. "Margaret Hoffman wants to meet you," Jennifer had added. "The elderly woman who lost her retirement savings. She says she has something to tell you." Which was how I found myself, 2 days after my therapy session, sitting in a modest apartment in Queens across from a woman whose strength had impressed me from the moment she'd taken the witness stand. Margaret Hoffman was 74, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had seen too much but hadn't lost their sharpness. Her apartment was small but immaculate, filled with family photos and handmade quilts. "I wanted to thank you," she said, pouring tea from a delicate china service that had probably been a wedding gift decades ago. "Because of your testimony, I got back enough to move out of my daughter's basement and into this place. Mrs. Hoffman, you don't need to thank me. If anything, I should apologize. I had the resources to stop Marcus years ago, if I'd been paying attention to anything beyond my own situation." She studied me with the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd raised several children and wasn't easily fooled by evasions. "You couldn't have stopped him," she said firmly. "Men like that, they're like water finding cracks. They'll always find a way in until someone builds a dam strong enough to hold them back." But the other victims would have been victims regardless. The only difference is whether they got justice afterward. She leaned forward, her voice taking on the authority of someone who'd learned hard lessons. "You want to know what I learned from all this? It's not about the money. It's about the fact that someone saw me as disposable." Her words hit harder than I'd expected. That was exactly what Marcus had done to all of us, seen us as resources to be exploited rather than people to be valued. He made me feel foolish for believing in love at my age, Margaret continued. Made me think I deserved to lose everything because I was naive enough to trust him. But watching you in that courtroom, seeing how you'd protected yourself while still helping the rest of us, it reminded me that being victimized doesn't make you a victim. After I left Margaret's apartment, I drove aimlessly through the city, processing her words. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows of my car when my phone rang. Cassandra Williams, whom I'd grown surprisingly close to over the past months. "Elena, I have news. Good news, actually." I could use some good news. I got the job. Senior Marketing Director at Peterson & Associates. It's in Boston, but the salary is incredible. And after everything with Marcus, I think a fresh start might be exactly what I need. I felt genuinely happy for her. Cassandra had been as much a victim of Marcus's manipulation as anyone, but she'd refused to let it define her future. That's wonderful. When do you start? 2 weeks. But Elena, there's something else. I've been thinking about what you said, about authentic relationships requiring authentic people. I've been seeing someone new, and I told him everything. About Marcus, about the whole mess, about how I was basically the other woman in a marriage that was built on lies. How did he react? He thanked me for being honest, said he'd rather know the complicated truth than live with a simple lie. After we hung up, I realized that Cassandra had accomplished something I was still struggling with. She'd learned to lead with honesty rather than hiding behind protective deceptions. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my office. Thomas Morrison, looking considerably more weathered than when we'd first met, but carrying himself with renewed dignity. Ms. Chen, I wanted to update you on the aftermath of the Morrison and Associates situation. He'd cleaned house thoroughly after the Marcus scandal. 3 partners had been forced out for failing to properly vet employees. New background check procedures had been implemented. The firm's reputation was slowly recovering. We've also established a pro bono program for fraud victims, he continued. Legal representation for people who've been financially exploited. I thought you should know, since your case was what opened our eyes to how widespread this problem is. That's admirable, Mr. Morrison. It's necessary. We built our reputation on being able to read people, spot deception, protect our clients. The fact that we harbored someone like Carson for 2 years, it was a wake-up call. After he left, I found myself thinking about second chances and the difference between making amends and seeking forgiveness. Morrison wasn't asking for absolution. He was demonstrating change through action. That evening, I had dinner with Victoria Blackwell at a restaurant I'd never been to before, neutral ground, away from the social circles where we'd previously interacted. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble once we'd ordered. We all do. The way we treated you at parties, dismissing your opinions, talking over you, it was inexcusable. You treated me exactly the way I presented myself. No, we treated you the way Marcus told us to treat you. And we should have been smart enough, kind enough, to form our own opinions. Victoria paused, swirling her wine. I've been thinking about how many other people I've dismissed because they didn't fit my preconceptions about success or importance. It was, I realized, what this entire experience had taught all of us. Marcus's crimes had been the obvious evil: theft, fraud, manipulation. But the subtler evil had been our willingness to judge people's worth based on surface appearances and social positioning. Victoria, can I ask you something? Did you ever suspect I wasn't who I claimed to be? She considered the question seriously. There were moments. The way you moved through high-end restaurants like you belonged there. Your knowledge of wine and art that seemed too sophisticated for someone supposedly struggling financially. But I dismissed those observations because they didn't fit the narrative Marcus had created. Why didn't you ask questions? Because it was easier not to. If you were really this successful businesswoman pretending to be powerless, that would mean I'd been treating someone important badly. It was more comfortable to believe you were nobody special. Her honesty was brutal and necessary. We all had our roles in the deception. Marcus as the primary architect, me as the willing participant, and everyone else as the audience that chose to see what was easiest to see. A month later, I stood in the conference room of my office building, addressing the employees of E.L. Chen Consulting for the first time as their visible present leader. For the past several years, you've worked for a ghost, I began. Someone who communicated through intermediaries, made decisions from the shadows, remained essentially anonymous. That changes now. The room was filled with people I'd hired, promoted, and worked alongside without them ever knowing who I really was. Some faces showed curiosity, others skepticism, a few registered what looked like relief. I want to explain why I maintained that anonymity, but more importantly, I want to discuss how we move forward as a company that values transparency and authentic leadership. Over the next hour, I outlined new policies: open-door access to senior management, regular all-hands meetings, transparent promotion criteria, and anonymous feedback systems that actually protected employee anonymity rather than just claiming. 2. I learned the hard way that deception, even deception meant to protect, ultimately corrupts everything it touches. We're going to build something different here. Jennifer Rodriguez, one of the employees who'd been promoted since the restructuring, raised her hand. Ms. Chen, how do we know this isn't just another kind of performance? How do we trust that you're really being authentic now? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. You don't, I said simply. Trust isn't given. It's earned. Through consistent behavior over time. I'm asking for the opportunity to earn it. After the meeting, Sarah approached with her usual tablet full of updates. The Peterson Group wants to partner with us on the downtown development project. The mayor's office is requesting a meeting about affordable housing initiatives. And there's a documentary crew that's still interested in telling your story. Set up the meetings with Peterson and the mayor's office. As for the documentary, I paused, considering. Set up a preliminary meeting, but make it clear that any story would need to include interviews with Marcus's other victims. This isn't just about me. That evening, I sat in my penthouse for the first time in months without feeling like I was hiding. The space that had once been my secret sanctuary now felt like simply home, not a fortress protecting a false identity, but a place where I could be genuinely myself. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakable. Elena? It's Marcus. I should have hung up immediately. The restraining order had expired, but there was no legal requirement for me to speak to him. Yet something in his voice, defeated, hollow, genuinely broken, made me stay on the line. I'm calling from prison, he continued. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you something. What? I'm sorry. Not the manipulative sorry I used to use when I got caught lying. Real sorry. For what I did to you, to all those women, to everyone whose lives I damaged. The apology hung in the silence between us. I wanted to feel vindicated, satisfied that he was finally taking responsibility. Instead, I felt exhausted. Marcus, why are you calling me? Because you're the only person who knew both versions of me. The fake lawyer I pretended to be, and the con artist I actually was. And you're the only person who might understand what I'm trying to say. Which is? That living a lie isn't just cruel to other people. It's a prison you build for yourself, one choice at a time. Until you forget who you were before you started pretending to be someone else. I closed my eyes, recognizing the truth in his words because I'd lived it myself. I spent 3 years pretending to be powerless while you pretended to be powerful, I said. We both lost ourselves in the performance. The difference is you found your way back to the truth. I don't even remember who I was before I started lying. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, thinking about the strange symmetry of our relationship. 2 people, both living lies, both discovering the price of deception. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had targeted me because he thought I was vulnerable and dependent. I had married him while hiding my true identity and wealth. We'd both been hunting each other in our own ways, never realizing we were equally matched predators. But there was one crucial difference. His lies had been designed to destroy others, while mine had been designed to protect myself. Intent, as I'd told the reporters, mattered. My phone buzzed with a final text from Sarah. Documentary crew confirmed for tomorrow. Margaret Hoffman and 3 other victims agreed to participate. They want to call it The Art of Deception, When Lies Collide. I smiled at the title. It captured something the news stories had missed. This wasn't just about a con man getting caught. It was about what happens when 2 people, both living elaborate deceptions, collide with enough force to shatter all their carefully constructed illusions. Tomorrow, I would tell our story publicly for the first time. Not as the victim or the victor, but as someone who'd learned that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones other people tell you. They're the ones you tell yourself about who you're willing to become. Marcus had spent 15 years becoming a different person with each new victim. I had spent 3 years becoming someone I thought he needed me to be. The difference was that I'd found my way back to the truth. He was still searching for who he'd been before the lies began. Standing at my window, looking out at the city lights, I realized something that would have terrified the woman I'd been a year ago. I was finally ready to be seen exactly as I was. No masks, no pretense, no protection beyond the truth. After all, the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's discovering you no longer need to be anyone other than yourself. The game was over. Reality had won. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.